Fire took everything. My childhood home, my father's letters, the last traces of who I was before Elise decided I was her enemy. I stood in the ashes of Riverside, choking on smoke and grief, as my sister watched from across the street, her silhouette unmoved, her eyes gleaming with something colder than the dawn. She didn't just want me gone, she wanted me erased. Days later, she held me down in a courthouse bathroom and shaved my head, claiming it was for order, for control. But it was to break me before I could stand in that courtroom and speak. What she didn't know was that the man I love, the one she dismissed as a nobody, was about to walk in wearing the robe she thought she owned. And when he took the bench, she wasn't ready for what he read out loud. But before I tell you what happened when the gavel fell, tell me, where are you watching this from? What time is it where you are? Drop it in the comments below. The air smelled of stone and humidity, old Riverside wrapped in morning fog. My heels clicked on the courthouse steps, steady and sharp, echoing louder than I felt inside. I tightened my grip on the leather portfolio in my hand, the same one I carried into my dissertation defense years ago. That morning, I had felt prepared. Today, not so much. This wasn't supposed to be about me. I was just here to observe, maybe support. At least that's what I told myself. Inside, the marble floor shimmered under the sterile lights. The security guard barely looked up as I passed through, but others did. Eyes followed me with that look, the one that said, "Why is she here?" It was never direct, just small darts of glances from people I used to call family. I spotted them across the atrium. My mother's posture was stiff, arms crossed like she was bracing for impact. And Elise, my older sister, sat effortlessly elegant in her ivory blazer, legs crossed, smirking like she already won something I didn't know I was competing for. I kept walking. A woman behind the registration table waved me over. Her tone was polite but impersonal. "Name? Jane Smith," I answered, offering a faint smile. She looked down at her list, frowned slightly, then handed me a badge. I took it without glancing until I clipped it onto my blazer and felt a chill crawl up my neck. Printed in bold black letters, J. Nobody. I blinked. This isn't right, I said, voice low but firm. It should say Smith. Jane Smith. The woman barely looked up. "That's what the list says, ma'am. If you'd like to speak to someone, you'll have to wait. But you can't enter the courtroom without a badge." The words hit harder than they should have. I wasn't even surprised, not really. From across the atrium, Elise was watching me. She raised her phone slowly, deliberately, and I saw the soft click of a snapshot as her screen reflected my badge. She tilted her head and grinned like a child who had pulled a prank and couldn't wait for the punchline. I didn't flinch. I just nodded and turned away. If this was a game, I wasn't going to give her the reaction she wanted. I adjusted the badge, smoothing it down against my chest like I wore it proudly. But my hand stayed there too long, pressed hard. I could feel the edges biting into my palm. It was like someone had scrawled the truth of how they saw me. Like I didn't matter. Didn't belong. Maybe they believed it. Maybe they wanted me to believe it, too. The hallway to the courtroom was quiet, too quiet. Each step I took felt heavier, like my shoes were sinking into the floor. My mother turned away when I passed, just slightly, but enough. This wasn't just about a court case. This was a message. The badge was a statement, and Elise had delivered it with flair. I found my seat on the far side, nowhere near the family rows. As I sat, I glanced down again. J. Nobody. Not even a typo. A choice. Maybe I'd always been a ghost in this family. The quiet one. The one who said, sure, too easily. The one who didn't fight back because she thought being silent was the noble thing. Maybe they mistook my silence for weakness. I gripped the badge again, tighter this time, letting the edges dig in until I felt something sharp, like a warning. From across the aisle, Elise leaned over and whispered to our mother, then laughed behind her hand. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. The court doors opened, people shuffled inside, heels clicking, papers rustling, the distant coughs of someone bored or bitter. I stood to enter. Elise passed by me slowly, her perfume trailing behind her like a second skin. She leaned in close, just enough so I could feel the warmth of her breath as she whispered, "No one invited you, Jane." Just know that. She didn't wait for a response, and I didn't give her one because I already knew what this was. This wasn't their custody hearing. It was mine. The door shut behind me with a quiet thud that echoed louder than it should have in a courtroom full of whispers and waiting eyes. I took a seat near the back, not far from the counsel table, but far enough to stay unseen, if such a thing were possible in a room designed for exposure. The badge still clung to my blazer like an insult I hadn't asked for. I sat up straight, crossed my legs, and tried to disappear into the fabric of the chair. The judge hadn't arrived yet. I wasn't on the docket, not officially. I was only here to support a distant cousin's custody hearing, or at least that's what I had been told. That's the story Elise gave me anyway. Now, I wasn't so sure there ever was a cousin. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as Elise's attorney stood, smoothing the front of his suit with theatrical precision. His voice was calm but heavy with performative authority. Your Honor, we'd like to begin our statement with a brief presentation just to provide some necessary context about the environment surrounding this case. Context. That word hit me wrong. I blinked as the screen on the far wall lit up. A projector buzzed softly. A PowerPoint interface blinked to life, and there it was, my face, huge, blown up tenfold. My shoulders hunched, my expression mid-blink, caught off guard. And below my face, the badge, clear as daylight. J. Nobody. Gasps fluttered across the room like a wave breaking on a shore. A few people shifted in their seats. One juror raised their eyebrows. Another whispered to someone next to them. Elise's attorney gestured with one hand, smooth as a salesman. This image was taken just this morning. We thought it was important to show how certain individuals have inserted themselves into this proceeding. Uninvited, unscheduled, and potentially unstable. Unstable. I gripped the bench so hard my nails pressed into the polished wood. I didn't move, didn't blink. The lights made the sweat gather along my collarbone. I forced my jaw not to clench. I wasn't going to let them have that. The lawyer tapped the clicker again, bringing up a second slide, metadata and timestamps, but something was off. The timecode said the photo had been taken at 6:45 a.m., before court even opened, before I arrived. That's not possible. I had parked at 7:20. I remembered because I had looked at the time while checking the court map, my hands still trembling from the memory of the fire that had gutted my past. I had even taken a photo of the courthouse myself, time-stamped. My throat went dry. My mind clicked into place like gears grinding against one another. They'd faked it. Elise or someone in her circle had altered the timestamp metadata. She wasn't just humiliating me. She was framing me, just as she'd stood by while our home burned, letting the flames erase the evidence of who I was. A whisper from the judge broke the silence. Was Miss Smith even on the witness list? The attorney's lips curled into something too smug to be accidental. No, Your Honor. She appeared of her own volition, walked in with that badge on, sat herself down, and, well, he let his voice trail off like it pained him to say the rest. You can't teach people boundaries. I turned my eyes toward Elise. She didn't look at me. She didn't need to. She knew I'd look. She simply straightened her skirt and watched the screen like she was proud of it, the same way she'd watched the fire consume our history without a word. I'd seen this tactic before, years ago, when I was 15. Our parents had thrown a dual birthday party for us every year since we were children. But that year, Elise had forgotten to include my name on the invitation. The entire class had shown up thinking it was her party alone, and she never corrected them. That night, I'd sat on the swing set in the backyard, eating cake alone, pretending I was okay with it, pretending it didn't sting to be erased. The memory of that night burned as sharply as the fire had, the flames licking at the edges of my resolve. This moment, this courtroom, that same sting, magnified in public. But this time, I wasn't 15, and I wasn't going to disappear. I closed my eyes for a beat, not to cry, but to regroup, to summon the strength I'd found standing in the ashes of Riverside, determined to rebuild. The courtroom murmured around me, but I was scanning, assessing. Then I noticed him. In the far back corner, a man sat quietly, arms folded, no notes, no laptop. His suit was worn but neat. His eyes weren't on the attorney. They were on Elise, not blinking, not smiling, watching her like someone who had seen a mask fall before. He didn't look like press. He didn't whisper to anyone. He just observed. And something about the way he leaned in when Elise spoke. It was like he was waiting, not for the story, but for the moment she'd slip, the way she'd slipped when she let the fire rage without lifting a finger. He didn't take notes. He just watched Elise like he already knew what she was. Before I could piece together who the man in the back was, a soft rustling broke the tension. A clerk moved toward the judge with a sealed envelope. Plain, no markings, no stamps, just crisp and ominous. Something about the way the judge's brow furrowed told me it wasn't part of the original proceedings. Your Honor, the clerk said quietly, this was delivered just now, marked urgent, anonymous sender. The judge opened it slowly, like peeling back something rotten. Silence swept through the courtroom again. His eyes scanned the contents, then paused, longer than he should have. He glanced my way for a second that stretched far too long before turning to the court reporter. Please record this as an addendum to the hearing exhibits, he instructed, and tapped the document twice before setting it down with a heavy sigh. Then he looked straight at me. Miss Smith, he said, voice measured but not unkind, are you aware that there's a psychological evaluation bearing your name from the Riverside Mental Health Institute, dated October 2011? My pulse faltered. The words caught in my throat. That place, that year, I hadn't spoken of it in over a decade. I barely let myself think about it. It wasn't therapy. It wasn't healing. It was silence dressed up in sterile paperwork, a silence forced on me after the fire, when Elise had whispered to our mother that I was unstable for weeping over the ashes. The attorney stood again, lips curved into something too controlled to be sincere. Your Honor, we present this only to provide full context around Miss Smith's mental stability. The document was unearthed by a concerned party. We believe it speaks volumes. The page turned on the projector. Clinical, stark, diagnosis, emotional instability, behavioral dysregulation. I didn't recognize the words because they weren't mine. They weren't me. I wasn't unstable. I was 21 and locked outside during a snowstorm by my sister, the same sister who'd let our home burn while she stood by, unmoved. I was barefoot, sobbing after she had turned the deadbolt and turned off her phone. It was supposed to be funny, her friends laughing from the window. She'll be fine. She always freaks out over nothing. I had collapsed on the steps, half frozen, shaking uncontrollably until a neighbor called an ambulance. But the next morning, our mother had whispered, this is what happens when you overreact. People will think you're crazy. Do you want that? She drove me herself, quietly, deliberately, to a hospital an hour away. She signed the papers. I stayed there for 48 hours. And when I got back, no one in the family brought it up again. Not even me. Not until now. My heart pounded like it was trying to claw its way out, the same way it had when I stood in the ruins of our home, searching for anything to salvage. But my face didn't move. I wouldn't give Elise the satisfaction of watching me break, not after she'd already taken so much. She sat still at the table, hands folded, lips tight, but there was the faintest upward twitch at the corner of her mouth, like this was her masterpiece finally hanging on the gallery wall, a portrait painted over the ashes of my life. This isn't therapy, I whispered to myself. It's erasure. Because that's what they did. Reframe everything I survived into some shameful fiction, just as they'd rewritten the fire as an accident, not a betrayal. If you control the narrative, you don't need the truth. I glanced toward my mother. She was there, 3 rows behind Elise, clutching her handbag like it might explode. She didn't look at me. She looked down. Of course, she did. The judge asked if I had any statement in response. I stood slowly and cleared my throat. My voice trembled, but not from fear. That file was created without my consent. I was never diagnosed. I was placed in that hospital by family members who wanted to avoid scrutiny, not because I was a danger to anyone. The real danger was being locked out in a storm for existing, just like the real danger was watching our home burn while my sister did nothing. A murmur rippled. The judge didn't respond, just nodded for the record to reflect my statement. No judgment, no acknowledgement, just paper. Because in a courtroom, facts don't matter, only what's written. I sat down and caught a movement out of the corner of my eye. The man at the back, he stood for the first time. He walked with slow, purposeful steps, approached the bailiff, and leaned in. They exchanged quiet words. Then the bailiff looked toward the bench and nodded once. The judge's eyes narrowed. He picked up the microphone. "Miss Smith," he said again, "please remain seated. There's been a development." Elise's head whipped around, and for the first time all day, she looked afraid, her composure cracking like the charred beams of our old home. The judge's gavel tapped twice, not to end the session but to pause it. A ripple of tension moved through the room like heat off pavement. "We'll take a brief recess," he announced, though no one moved. "Councillors and parties involved, please join me in chambers." Victor Lane didn't wait for an invitation. He walked with a precision that felt military, his coat never wrinkling, his eyes never shifting. He passed Elise without so much as a glance, but she flinched anyway, as if she sensed the weight of what was coming, the same way she'd sensed the fire's inevitability but chose to let it burn. I followed the flow of suits and silence down a narrow hallway to the private judicial chamber. The wood felt older here, less performative, like the truth had no need for grand architecture. The judge closed the door behind us. "Mr. Lane," he said, "I assume you're not here on vacation." Victor nodded once and placed a sealed manila envelope on the desk. A faint watermark from the Department of Justice shimmered under the chamber lights. "You'll want to review this before allowing the hearing to proceed further," he said evenly. "It pertains directly to the misuse of sealed federal records, namely Exhibit 12A, which was submitted to malign Miss Jane Smith's credibility." Elise opened her mouth, probably to object, but the judge raised a hand. "You're saying Exhibit 12A was obtained illegally?" Victor tapped the envelope. "She used a court system login credential not assigned to her. We've been monitoring several flagged queries made under Judge Carter's staff access credentials, dating back 3 months. All tied to this hearing. All tied to Miss Elise Smith." I didn't speak. I didn't breathe. I watched as Elise's expression stiffened like fresh clay under heat, her facade crumbling like the walls of our childhood home. "This is absurd," she snapped. "You can't just barge in here with some vague accusation." "I'm not here to accuse," Victor cut her off. "I'm here to confirm what we've already documented. You accessed mental health records sealed under HIPAA protections. That's a federal offense." The room went very still. Victor turned slightly toward me, but never softened. "We've been investigating a pattern of ethical violations tied to Miss Smith's legal activities, including her involvement in the Riverside fire incident, which was suspiciously underreported." Elise looked at the judge like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "You can't take his word over mine. I've worked in this system for years." "That's exactly why this is serious," the judge said flatly. "You know better." Elise's attorney, who had been silent so far, finally spoke. "We'll need time to review any evidence." Victor was already flipping open the packet. The top page bore Elise's name, time-stamped login credentials, and a list of accessed files, including mine, alongside a report hinting at her presence at the scene of the fire, unaccounted for in official records. "This isn't a gray area," Victor said. "It's black-letter law. Miss Smith's behavior suggests a pattern of manipulation that includes falsifying metadata, weaponizing sealed documents, and potentially concealing involvement in a catastrophic event for personal advantage." And then he said the line that hit harder than anything I expected. "I'm not here to defend you, Miss Smith," he told me. "I'm here to expose her." Something shifted inside me. Not relief, not triumph, just clarity. For years, I'd thought maybe I'd misremembered, exaggerated, made too much of things. But here it was, paper, dates, facts, and now a thread connecting Elise to the fire that had stolen my past. Still, Elise wasn't done. She turned toward me slowly, her tone quiet but slicing. "You think I'm scared of you? I built this courtroom. You're just a footnote I let stick around too long, just like I let that house burn to teach you a lesson." My hands clenched, but not with fear. I stepped closer, voice low but steady. "Then it's time to tear it down, Elise, brick by brick, like you tried to tear me down." The hallway felt colder when I stepped out of chambers, like the temperature had dropped 15 degrees just for me. My heels echoed against the marble, the click-click cadence of a woman trying to keep it together, carrying the weight of a home lost and the truth found. Elise was already there, leaned casually against the wall as if she hadn't just been exposed. Her face was calm, almost amused. She tilted her head when I approached. "Cute little show back there," she said, her voice low and syrupy. "But you should know it only takes one signature to have you held for a 48-hour mental health evaluation. You sure you want to keep pushing?" Her words landed soft but stung sharp around us, like embers floating from the fire she'd let consume our past. Courthouse staff moved with deliberate ignorance. No one made eye contact. No one intervened. That was the thing about power. It didn't have to be loud. It could whisper in hallways, dressed in a navy pantsuit and a smirk. I opened my mouth, but no words came. Not yet. My chest was tight, breath shallow. Elise smiled wider. "Didn't think so," she said, brushing past like she'd won again. I didn't know where my feet were taking me until I found myself on the stone steps outside. The sun was out now, harsh and too bright, like it hadn't gotten the memo that everything inside me had gone dim, shadowed by the memory of flames. I sat down on a bench under a bare tree, just enough shade to hide in, not enough to comfort. A few pigeons scuffled around the edge of the sidewalk. I didn't look at them. I just stared at my hands, still shaking, the same hands that had sifted through the ashes of Riverside, searching for something to hold on to. A memory surfaced, uninvited. I was 21. There had been a snowstorm, unexpected and brutal. I was locked out of our shared apartment because Elise forgot I was supposed to be home that weekend. I pounded on the door for 45 minutes before a neighbor let me in. That night, I had my first full-blown panic attack. Our mother told me I was being dramatic. A week later, I was in therapy, not to get better, to be quiet. "Elise doesn't lie," my mother had said. "She just remembers things better than you." That was the same excuse she'd used when I asked why Elise hadn't called for help as the fire roared through our home. I pulled out my phone, thumb hovering over Nathan's contact. I typed, "Maybe it's not worth it." Then I stared at the blinking cursor for too long. "You okay, Mom?" I looked up. A young woman stood a few feet away, holding out a water bottle. Her courthouse badge read Leela. Her brown eyes were cautious, kind. "I saw what happened," she said. "That woman, your sister, she treats people like tissue paper, uses them, tosses them. I heard about the fire, too. People talk. They say she was there, just watching. I accepted the bottle. You work for her." Interned. "Not anymore." A pause. Then she added, "You didn't let her win yet, so don't." The words hit harder than they should have, like a spark reigniting something I thought the fire had burned out. I'd said something like that once, years ago, to a freshman at college whose roommate trashed her art project out of jealousy. I didn't even remember the girl's name, but I remembered her tears and how she smiled when I told her not to give away her victory just because someone louder said she'd lost. I stood up. My body still felt unsteady, but something inside me had locked back into place, forged in the heat of that tragedy. Leela watched me. "Whatever you're about to do, make it hurt," she said, her tone half joking, half hopeful. I nodded. "It won't just hurt. It'll echo, like the crack of burning timber." I walked to the far end of the courtyard and dialed Nathan. He picked up on the first ring. "Talk to me. I'm ready to file the motion," I said. "Use the full clause. Whistleblower status. No redactions. And include the fire. Everything we've got." There was a pause. Then the familiar grit of his voice returned. "It's about time, Smith," he said, and the phone went silent. By the time I stepped back into the courtroom, the air had shifted, heavy with the weight of unspoken truths. The chatter was gone. The judge's assistant stood by the double doors, instructing reporters and visitors to leave. Closed session. Only legal counsel, essential staff, and involved parties would remain. Nathan gave me a subtle nod as I took my seat, his eyes steady, like he knew the fire hadn't just taken my past. It had tempered my resolve. The opposing attorney stood up and requested permission to call an expert witness in defense of character context. That phrase alone sent warning bells through my chest, sharp as the crackle of flames. The judge adjusted his glasses. Proceed. The doors opened again. A tall, lean man with a goatee and cold, polished demeanor walked in. Dr. Adrian Holt, the clerk announced. My stomach turned. The name wasn't unfamiliar. Years ago, during the fallout of my second year at Eastern University, he'd been mentioned once, briefly, by my department head, but I had never been his patient, never even spoken to him. Dr. Holt took the stand with a practiced ease. I'm a clinical psychiatrist with 25 years of experience, he began. During the Eastern International Fellowship cycle, I was consulted regarding a fellow named Jane Smith. Concerns of erratic behavior, emotional dysregulation, and institutional defiance, particularly after a traumatic event involving a fire. A ripple of murmurs. I froze. I couldn't breathe. The mention of the fire twisted the knife deeper, as if Elise had weaponized even that loss against me. I heard someone, Nathan, maybe, say, objection. But it was drowned out in the sudden noise. The judge rapped his gavel once. Let him finish. Then you may rebut. Elise sat in the front row, hands folded neatly in her lap. Gaze locked on me like she was watching a performance she'd already seen the ending to, her eyes glinting with the same cold satisfaction I'd seen across the street as our home burned. Dr. Holt continued, though no inpatient treatment was formally mandated, I advised temporary leave from duties. It's my professional opinion that Miss Smith's profile reflected patterns of paranoia and displacement, likely exacerbated by the Riverside fire. My pulse pounded in my ears, each beat a reminder of the flames that had taken everything. I wanted to stand, to scream, but I did neither. I waited. I needed to wait. Nathan slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside, a scanned letter bearing the signature of Professor Elena Voss, the fellowship director. I unfolded the sheet with shaky fingers. It read, to whom it may concern, Jane Smith remained in active standing during all fellowship duties. She was never placed under evaluation, nor did she meet with any psychiatric staff. Any statement to the contrary is inaccurate and not reflected in institutional records. Furthermore, no record exists linking Miss Smith's behavior to the Riverside fire. The judge asked if I had anything to submit. I stood. Your Honor, I respectfully request permission to present sealed records from my academic file, including internal grievances and personal statements on the record, and I'd like to be the one who reads them. There was a pause, a long one. The judge looked at me for a beat, then nodded once. I opened the folder. My hands were cold, but steady, as if the fire had burned away my fear. I had memorized every word over the years, but this was the first time I'd ever said them aloud. I, Jane Smith, filed a confidential harassment complaint against 3 peer fellows on April 12, 2013. No action was taken. Flip. On June 7, 2013, I was treated for a stress-induced ulcer following months of work sabotage. I was told I was overreacting. Flip. Emails between Professor Voss and the grant committee indicate concern about interpersonal targeting, with Jane as the documented target. I kept going, my voice steady, each word a brick laid in the foundation of a truth Elise couldn't burn down. The courtroom was silent. No coughs, no rustling paper, just my voice and the truth, rising like smoke from the ashes. Elise didn't interrupt. She didn't flinch. When I reached the final page, I paused. I was told, you always make things harder than they need to be. That wasn't a diagnosis. That was a warning, just like the warning I ignored the night Elise let our home burn. I folded the record closed with trembling fingers and looked straight into Elise's eyes, seeing not just my sister, but the architect of my erasure, the one who'd stood by as flames consumed my past and now tried to consume my future. Outside the courtroom, the early fall breeze rustled through the live oaks lining Market Street. I stood at the base of the courthouse steps, taking in the stillness before the storm, the air cool against my skin, untainted by smoke. My breath fogged faintly in the morning air, the silence around me oddly soothing. I hadn't slept much in the past week, not since the hearing adjourned, not since I read those words aloud, not since I'd begun to reclaim what the fire and Elise had tried to take. But for the first time in a while, I hadn't woken up feeling small. As I entered the courthouse lobby, I caught whispers, a hushed tension in the air, like something unscripted was unfolding. Two clerks near the security desk were murmuring, just barely audible. "Did you hear who's presiding today? I thought Judge Harlan had this docket." "No, Harlan's out sick. Substitution was filed late last night. Smith's on the bench now." I paused mid-step. Smith. Not me, Nathan. My stomach dropped and flipped at the same time. I walked slowly through the metal detector, my bag held tight against my chest, the weight of the fire's memory pressing against my resolve. By the time I stepped into the gallery, all eyes were already forward. The court officer stood tall by the door. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Nathan Smith presiding." I froze. He entered from the side door in full robe, stoic, unreadable, not even a flicker of recognition on his face. The same man who once traced constellations on my back at 3 a.m., promising we'd rebuild after the fire, was now seated behind the elevated bench, wooden gavel in hand, judicial calm masking the fire I knew burned beneath. Elise, seated 2 rows up with her attorney, let out a short, incredulous laugh. "You have got to be kidding me." Her lawyer tugged at her sleeve. "Quiet." She ignored him. "This is a joke, right? Her fiancé gets to decide the case now. What's next? Jury made up of bridesmaids?" Nathan lifted his head slightly. "Miss Smith, please be advised. I filed my judicial recusal from all familial affiliations effective 4 weeks ago. My assignment today is strictly procedural and was confirmed through the clerk's office." He tapped the file in front of him. "Now, shall we proceed?" Elise shrank back, lips pursed tight. Her voice didn't carry that same confidence anymore, as if the fire of her certainty had finally met a truth it couldn't consume. Nathan turned to the courtroom assistant. "Please enter into Record Exhibit 8D, full audit disclosure of Smith Family Trust and associated nonprofit activities, including financial irregularities tied to the Riverside fire's aftermath." The screen came alive behind him, lines of figures, names of vendors, timestamps, wire transfers. I'd seen the paperwork, yes, but hearing it read aloud by someone with the power to act on it made my skin tingle, like the heat of flames giving way to the cool touch of justice. Nathan's voice was even, but every word was a scalpel. According to this report, $750,000 was funneled from the Smith Women's Education Fund through shell vendors, Brightheart Consulting, Blue Tree Digital, and Laurel Foundation, all traced back to Miss Elise Smith's personal accounts. Elise opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came. Her lawyer pressed a hand to his brow. Nathan continued, tone firm. "These transfers occurred during fiscal years when the trust was inactive, meaning Jane Smith's portion was frozen but used as silent collateral in private debt clearance, with additional funds diverted to cover undisclosed expenses related to the Riverside fire." I sat still. I didn't interrupt. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. This was not vengeance. This was verification, a reckoning for the home I'd lost and the truth I'd fought to reclaim. Nathan looked down at the bench, then back to the parties. "The court finds substantial cause to pursue a civil breach inquiry under Fiduciary Violation Code 42.7c. Effective immediately, this matter is referred to the Department of Justice for investigation, with a recommendation to examine potential criminal liability in the Riverside fire." Elise flinched, her eyes darting left, then right, searching for an exit that wasn't there, just as I'd searched for a way out of the smoke and ruin she'd left me in. Nathan didn't look at me once, not even after the ruling. He stood, nodded toward the clerk, and exited the bench as cleanly as he had entered. Only then did I stand too, but not to follow him. I turned toward the back of the courtroom and caught my reflection in the tall glass panel near the door. Same dark suit, same posture. But something was different. My face didn't look small anymore. I didn't look like someone waiting to be picked or protected or proven. I looked like someone who had walked through fire, literal and figurative, and emerged whole. And not because I fought louder. I didn't win because I yelled. I won because I waited, because I proved, because I refused to disappear, even when the flames tried to claim me. The courtroom was beginning to empty. Shoes clicked against the old marble floors, paper shuffled into briefcases, and distant chatter hummed like an engine winding down. I had just reached the tall oak doors, fingers grazing the cold brass handle, when I heard it. "Your Honor, we request an emergency injunction." The words sliced through the room like glass on stone. I turned. Elise's attorney was on his feet, waving a legal motion in the air like a flag of desperation. This entire session is compromised. Conflict of interest. The presiding judge is the romantic partner of the petitioner. We believe bias has tainted every ruling. Elise's eyes were wide, not frightened, but electric. She was smiling again, the same smile she wore when she cornered me in the hallway last week, the same one she wore as she watched our home burn. Nathan had already stepped down, protocol observed, but he turned back slightly, his mouth set in a line. The bailiff retrieved the motion and passed it to the clerk. Within moments, it landed in the hands of Judge Margaret Evelyn Rhodes, retired but pulled in for emergency review. Judge Rhodes has taken emergency oversight, the clerk announced. Please remain seated. I did not speak. Not yet. Elise, now almost giddy, leaned into her attorney's shoulder and whispered something. His chest puffed. He must have thought they'd backed me into a corner. I reached into my bag, the same leather portfolio I'd carried since the first hearing, the same one my father gave me before the fire claimed his letters. I walked back toward the bench, heels deliberate, pulse steady, the memory of flames fueling each step. I handed the sealed envelope to the clerk, who passed it along. Your Honor, I said calmly, that document contains an affidavit notarized 3 months before my father passed away. I ask that it be entered into the sealed record. Judge Rhodes adjusted her glasses. Do you understand what this means, Miss Smith? Once I open this, we proceed under sworn admission. There's no taking it back. I understand, I said, and I did. The judge broke the wax seal, her brows lifted ever so slightly as she began reading. She paused once, then twice, and then read aloud. I, Franklin J. Smith, being of sound mind and clear intent, do hereby declare that the initial concept, funding, and operational proposal for the Smith Women's Education Fund were the sole creation of Jane Smith. I insisted her sister Elise be presented as the face of the foundation, only to protect the family's image and to secure traditional donor confidence. I deeply regret this decision. The courtroom didn't erupt. It imploded silently. The words continued. Signed, dated, witnessed, notarized. I took from Jane what she built. I let Elise pretend. I told myself it was for the greater good, but I know now it was cowardice. I failed to protect Jane when the fire took our home, and I failed to stop Elise from using that tragedy to bury her sister's truth. Elise shot up. This is fake. He would have never. Judge Rhodes held up a palm. Sit down, Miss Smith. Elise's mouth opened, then closed. Her voice, for the first time, had nowhere to go, silenced like the crackle of flames finally extinguished. Judge Rhodes continued, the motion to suspend proceedings on the basis of conflict is denied. The document provided is valid. Furthermore, based on this affidavit and accompanying financial disclosures, this court rules that Miss Elise Smith shall be removed from all founding and operational documents of the Smith Women's Education Fund, effective immediately. She looked up, voice firm. You may have had the spotlight, Miss Elise, but the light was never yours. And you will answer for the fire, in this court or another. Elise sat slowly. Her attorney pressed his fingers to his temple, already sensing the appeals process forming like storm clouds. The clerk walked toward me with a fresh copy of the revised Articles of Incorporation. My name alone now sat at the top, founder. I took the paper with steady hands and said nothing. There was nothing to say that the truth hadn't already spoken louder, a truth that rose from the ashes of Riverside and stood unburned. The sun was beginning to dip outside the courtroom windows, casting long amber light across the benches. It touched Elise's face, but for once, she wasn't basking in it. She looked smaller now, not ruined, but exposed, like a shadow revealed by daylight. And me. I didn't feel like a winner. I felt like a woman who'd been walking with stones in her pockets for years, stones of grief, of loss, of a home burned to nothing, and finally set them down. Truth, it turns out, isn't a firework. It's a weight, one that settles so deeply no one can lift it for you. But once it lands, there's no denying it exists, not even when flames try to erase it. Power didn't look like shouting. It looked like holding the truth until it was too heavy to ignore, like rebuilding from ashes with nothing but your own hands. 3 months passed. The courthouse had faded into memory, not gone, but quieter now, like the echo of a fire long extinguished. My name had been cleared. My rights restored. My work legally mine again. But freedom, that was still something I was learning how to carry, especially after losing so much to the flames. That morning, I arrived early, before the staff, before the noise, before the world. The sun was barely stretching over the rooftops, casting amber streaks across the sidewalk in front of the new center. A pair of sparrows hopped along the concrete, as if they too were checking the place out, unafraid of the past's embers. The community center had been rebuilt from the inside out, literally. The court had ordered full financial restitution. The shell companies were shut down. The crooked contracts revoked. Every siphoned dollar clawed back and returned, including funds misused in the wake of the fire. Inside, it smelled like fresh paint and new beginnings. The walls, now a soft dove gray, were bare for now, waiting for art from the girls who would soon fill this space, girls who'd never know the weight of flames or betrayal. I walked through the hall slowly, touching door frames, window ledges, the edges of the bulletin board in the common room. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to brace myself before turning a corner. There were no shadows left to dodge, no embers waiting to reignite. It was mine now, all of it. Not just on paper. In truth, a truth forged in fire and tempered by time. Elise hadn't apologized. She hadn't looked at me since the ruling. A month ago, she'd held a brief press conference, just long enough to announce her voluntary step back from public leadership to focus on personal reflection. She didn't say my name. She didn't say sorry. She blamed the shifting culture and miscommunication, claiming the fire was a tragic misunderstanding, and the foundation had simply malfunctioned on its own. People asked me if I wanted to go on air, respond. Some even pitched a book deal. I said no to all of it. Let her fill the silence with spin. I was done filling mine with defense, done explaining why I'd survived what she'd tried to burn away. Nathan had visited once, just once. He didn't bring flowers or excuses, just stood beside me while we watched the staff prep the art tables, the same tables where I'd once dreamed of teaching before the fire changed everything. He asked gently, "Do you want me to stay?" I took a long breath before answering. "I think I need to see who I am without someone rescuing me," I said. Even if that someone meant well. The fire took enough. I need to rebuild on my own. He nodded. He didn't argue. He just placed a hand on my shoulder for a moment, then left. Some things, I've learned, aren't meant to be rebuilt. They're meant to be remembered, right? Later that morning, I stopped by the art room. A handful of girls were already there, led by a new volunteer named Tara. She was no older than 22, eyes bright behind thick glasses. One of the girls, maybe 7 or 8 years old, was sitting at the far end of the table, working intently with red paper in her small hands. When I approached, she glanced up and smiled shyly. Without a word, she held something out to me. It was a paper crane, folded neatly, carefully, the wings a bit lopsided but proud. I froze. Years ago, I'd made one just like it, before the fire, when I still believed in sisterhood. I had given it to Elise after she'd won her first debate competition. I thought it was a gesture, a quiet token of love. She'd laughed, crumpled it, said I was always doing weird little things that no one asked for, just months before she'd let our home burn. Now, here was a child offering me the same shape. No sarcasm, no demand. Just something beautiful made with care and given freely. I took the crane gently from her hand. It was still warm from her fingers, untouched by the heat of betrayal. "Thank you," I said, voice hushed. She beamed. "I make them when I feel calm. Maybe you needed one." I nodded. Maybe I did. Outside, the sun had climbed higher, brushing the sidewalk with gold, free of smoke or shadow. I stepped out with the paper crane still in my hand, sunlight on my face. And for once, I didn't need to explain anything to anyone. Not to Elise, not to Nathan, not to the media or the past or the pages of sealed affidavits, because sometimes healing doesn't roar. Sometimes it folds itself into a small red crane and says, "You're allowed to begin again." The crane was still warm from the girl's hand, a quiet promise that no fire could burn away. I tucked it close and walked into the sun, my steps steady, my heart unburdened, ready to build something new from the ashes of what was lost. If Jane's journey from the ashes of Riverside to reclaiming her truth moved you, hit that subscribe button to join our community of storytellers and survivors. Drop a like to honor the strength it takes to rise above betrayal, and share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to rebuild from a loss like Jane's? Your voice matters, and we'd love to hear it. Don't miss the next story. Subscribe now and let's keep the truth burning bright.